I'm a big fan of the channel, and I think I have a story you might be interested in. It's kind of a creepy slash sad kind of story, but it's one that sticks with me all these years later, so I guess it's worth sharing with you. So at the start of 10th grade, this new kid called Caleb joined our school, and I had homeroom with him. You could tell right away that he was really weird, just super socially awkward and stuff, but he mostly kept to himself, and he was built like a defensive tackle, so no one really messed with him. Plus, he just sort of blended in, too. He didn't dress weird, didn't smell, like you didn't notice there was anything off about him until you actually spent time around him. If you did, you noticed that he had this really creepy habit, and I saw it up close on more than one occasion. My homeroom seat was about to the front right of Caleb, meaning I could look over my left shoulder and see him right there. So this one time we're in homeroom, but it's kind of like a free period, so everyone is talking and being super loud. Everyone except Caleb. Caleb was just sitting there, reading some old book he always carried around with him, and it looked like he was whispering to himself. You know the way kids kind of silently mouth the words they're reading, I guess out of habit or whatever? Well, that's what it looked like. I figured he just couldn't read very well, or that he was having trouble concentrating because of the noise. Unusual behavior, but nothing to freak out about. But as it turns out, that's not what was happening at all. Caleb kept whispering to himself, even when he wasn't reading. I caught him doing it in the hallway a few times, but I didn't want to confront him about it or anything, so I just sort of let him be. But then it got to the point where he did it a few times during the quiet parts of homeroom, like while the teacher was talking, and slowly but surely, everyone caught on to the fact that Caleb whispered to himself. The first time, the teacher asked in that really cliched way if he wanted to share with the class. He just went quiet and shook his head. The second time, it was totally quiet, and it got to the point where everyone around Caleb could hear him whispering. We were trying to work on something, I can't remember what it was, but the whispering was definitely all annoying and off-putting, so in the end, someone just said, "Dude, shut up." Everyone stifled laughter, and the teacher told us to be quiet and work, so that one just ended right there. This went on for weeks. Every so often, Caleb wouldn't be able to contain himself, and he'd start whispering at some awkward moment. The third time he did it in homeroom, or at least the third time I saw it anyway, someone actually snapped and asked him who he was even whispering to. Our homeroom teacher was aware of this little issue by that time, so she tried to interject to stop the confrontation from escalating. She basically tells the kid to back off and for Caleb to stop whispering, but then Caleb kind of just pauses, turns to the kid who asked him, and just said, "My mom." The kid's reply causes a ripple of laughter because he was all like, "You talking to your mommy?" Making fun of him, and our teacher quickly jumps in and tells everyone to shut up again. Only Caleb doesn't shut up. After weeks and weeks of not saying a single word above a whisper, he suddenly finds himself all conversational. "She talks," he said, referring to his mom. "So I answer." The class didn't laugh that time, and no one had a single smart word to say in response. That was on a Friday, and then when we got back to school on Monday, creepy Caleb was gone. They pulled him out of class so fast that you could still see his shadow that Monday morning, but since we didn't know the context surrounding it, we just kind of went on as normal and we got over it. And I just said, "Creepy Caleb, easy come, easy go." About a week or so later, me and my family ended up driving over to my older sister's place. She and her husband had been married for a few years, and he was a psychiatrist at this big hospital on the other side of town, so they lived in this super awesome house that we enjoyed visiting as often as we could. My brother-in-law was a cool guy and would sometimes discuss certain details of certain cases with us over dinner. He wasn't too detailed. He didn't name names. It was all just shop talk, and I barely understood any of it anyways, so I normally just tuned out and did my own thing. But then, like I said, we're over one Sunday, not long after creepy Caleb got pulled out of class, and one of the patients he mentions suddenly started sounding very familiar. My brother-in-law was talking about how hard his job is sometimes, and how sometimes he has to take time to decompress on his days off. I think my dad asked him what it was that got him so stressed, as I assumed it was all a bunch of rich folks telling him their problems for huge dollar amounts, but then my brother-in-law starts talking about it being the younger people whose stories can really get to him. We're all listening intently while my brother-in-law starts telling this really sad story about a kid who'd walked in on his mom taking her own life. Not like found her body or anything like that. I mean, he walked in, and she had the gun to her head, and they were locked eyes when she pulled the trigger, and it screwed the kid up for life. We're all obviously hooked into my brother-in-law's story, but when he mentioned how they just had to pull the kid out of school because of a serious setback in his progress, my ears started burning. My dad asked what kind of setback, and that's when my brother-in-law mentioned something about schizophrenia, and more specifically, something about the kid whispering to himself. Mom says that I was white as a sheet by the time the whispering thing came up, and that not long after, I blurted out, "What was the kid's name? Was it Caleb?" My brother-in-law freezes, gives me this stunned, wide-eyed look, then clearly lies when he says, "No, it wasn't Caleb." It was a blatant lie, and he never admitted to me that it was actually Caleb he was talking about, but the fact that he took me aside after dinner to give me a talking to was all I needed to know. He gave me some speech about doctor-patient confidentiality and how it would reflect really bad on him if it got out that he was talking about his work. I promised to keep my mouth shut, but the news about the kid got out in other ways. I promised my brother-in-law that I didn't say anything, but he said it was cool. Half the town had been involved in the kid's treatment in some way, and rumors spreads faster than wildfire in towns like ours. Hearing the truth about Caleb was so bad that no one in our homeroom class talked about it after we found out. It was just too raw, knowing we laughed and joked about something so utterly terrible. This kid was broken, completely shattered by life, and we'd been too ignorant and self-absorbed to really notice. I don't know how true the version of events are when it comes to Caleb's mom, but if that is true, if she blew her own head off right as her middle schooler came through the door, what was she thinking? And what system placed her kid back in school when he clearly wasn't ready for it? I guess you see a lot of horror and creepypasta podcasts out there, but most of it's all skinwalkers and black-eyed children and stuff like that. And yours is one of the only ones that talks about stuff that actually haunts people. I know plenty of sad stories. People's parents passing away out of the blue, people missing out on their preferred colleges, etc. These are sad stories. The one about Caleb and his mom is something way different, and way worse. I can't even imagine what it must have been like for a kid at whatever age he was to see their own mother die a violent, self-inflicted death. And that's what it means to be haunted by something. Caleb was talking to his mom like he could see her ghost, and that's not some dumb story. That was real. I don't think Caleb could really see a ghost, but I do think she still existed in his mind. His brain must have been echoing her voice around his skull, and talking back must have helped in some way. Hell, if it was me, I'd do just about anything to hear my mom's voice, even if it did make me look crazy.
When I was about 17, my mom and I moved to a large city in the US. I won't name the city due to what took place, but it's a city most people are familiar with. Anyway, we moved to this city to start our new lives as my mom had bought a business and would then take ownership. This meant that I would also have to transfer schools, which was the hardest part of the move. Saying goodbye to your longtime friends paired with all of those super great hormonal imbalances of your high school years. What made it worse was that I was a junior when I moved and would have to spend my senior year with no one I knew. The last day of school came around. I said goodbye to my friends and then rushed to the airport with my mom. The instant I switched schools, I became a totally different person. I was that one outgoing girl who loved her friends only to become a random nobody who sat alone at lunch. The school itself was okay, but it was nothing like my old school. I had made a few acquaintances, but nobody I actually enjoyed talking to like my other friends. One day, I had been at lunch eating by myself when, out of nowhere, a boy I had never seen before decides to sit with me. He introduced himself as Dave and asked if he could sit with me. I tell him yes, and he begins talking about himself and claimed he was also a new student here. We spoke to each other until lunch was over, where he had walked me to my class, which I found thoughtful. It's safe to say I found Dave very relatable the more we spoke. He had the same interests and even the same family issues. He seemed very sweet, and while he was a bit off, he wasn't a threat or anything. However, little did I know that would be further from the truth. One day, Dave, out of nowhere, had texted me asking about my bra size. I told him I wasn't comfortable answering that, to which he then instantly apologized and changed the topic. But as time progressed, he'd bring up the topic even though I wouldn't want to talk about it. It eventually came to a point where I chose not to speak with him even when he messaged me first. The same drill applied when he approached me at school too. Eventually, days went by, and for some reason I didn't see Dave at school anymore. I assumed that he had finally gotten the hint and just stayed clear of me. However, I was dead wrong. The following night, I had been at home on my computer doing a project for chemistry class when I heard something hit my window. Looking back, it kinda sounded like a pebble hitting my window. After all, it was raining outside, so I assumed it was probably the wind blowing away debris. However, it then happened a second time, this time much louder. I get up from my bed and walk over to the window, and there, crouched, is someone who I could only describe as Dave. He had on his hoodie and gave me an unnerving smile when he saw me. I screamed at the top of my lungs as I saw him and ran to my mom's room to wake her up. My mom is the type of person who was overprotective of her children, so when I told her, she was rightfully pissed. Why my dad isn't home is another story, but my mom puts on her shoes and goes out of the house with a baseball bat. All the while, she's screaming bloody murder, telling whoever was here to leave or she won't hesitate to knock their teeth in. My mom is a fighter and won't put up with anyone's BS, so when she said that, she meant it. After what felt like hours, she finally came back inside hugging me, and that whoever it was gone. Needless to say, we still felt safer calling the cops, and they take down our info and what had happened. Our motion sensor light didn't work, so it couldn't alert my mom when someone was outside our house. My mom pulled me out of school for a week and demanded the school sort out the situation with Dave. Turns out, Dave had been in and out of the school for the past year and was not at all a new student. He had been suspended many times for reasons like this, only to get back in for good behavior. How he found my house is a mystery, and quite frankly, I don't want to know. My best guess is that he somehow followed me home. That, or he managed to track me. Either way, this is and probably will be the scariest stalker experience I've ever had. I hadn't even known Dave for a month, and already something came up. I still think about this incident from time to time, and just wish I'd be back at my old school. A few weeks later, I moved to another school where it wasn't the best, but better by a landslide than the other one. Up until now, I try my best to stay clear of social media and outings as I'm still paranoid. This isn't a big county, meaning it was common to run into someone you knew. I hope I never see Dave again.
The story happened during my junior year of high school, so I was around 17 at the time. I live in a beach town in North Carolina, and I was in my first class of the day, physical science. We were working on our assignments and the fire alarm started going off. Everyone thought it was a typical fire drill, so we evacuated the building as usual. After getting outside, staff started instructing us to get further away from the building, and we learned that there had been a bomb threat called into the school. We ended up staying outside on the football field for 6 hours while law enforcement brought in the dogs and searched every single book bag in the building. Everyone got severely sunburned because it was around springtime when this happened, so it was really hot here in North Carolina. When they brought us lunch, it was frozen ham and cheese sandwiches, and they were frozen solid. Eventually, we were all given the clear to re-enter the building shortly before dismissal that day. I know this story isn't all that scary, but it really is when you think there's a bomb inside of your school and that everyone's safety is at risk. I really hope that none of you or your future children ever have to go through that same level of stress. Be safe out there. I was in high school when this happened. I'm a girl, and this went on when I was 18. The story starts when I was getting coffee in between classes with a classmate. A creepy 40-something-year-old man came up to us, and while we were sitting down talking about coffee we're getting and about classes, he starts to tell my friend that he's sitting in his seat. For some context, this was a cheap corner shop coffee next to a gas station, so there's no assigned seats, just 2 chairs and a table, and whoever was first and lucky that got to sit down. My classmate, not wanting to look intimidated by him, starts to telling him that this isn't his seat and that he's not moving since he was the first one there. There was something really scary about this man, and I was already shaking. The next thing I know, he's threatening my colleague, telling him he's going to shoot him, even though he doesn't pull out a gun and we live in a country where gun permits are very hard to get. But I get extremely scared, and I go inside the coffee shop to order my coffee, because I couldn't stand sitting next to that man one more second. The worker at the store tells me that the man is crazy and that we shouldn't take him seriously. People in my country, me included, are kind of used to crazy homeless people, and we encounter them pretty much on a daily basis, so it's not really seen as such a creepy thing. But I have a lot of anxiety anyways, and the thought of being killed by this random crazy man just made me freeze and made my heart drop. Anyways, as this man and my friend are having a staring contest outside, the creepy man backs away and leaves, congratulating my friend for being brave and not being intimidated, and then leaves. As he's leaving, I'm thinking that's it, and it was just another creepy homeless dude. As a disclaimer, I'm not using homeless as an insult. I'm simply stating the obvious since he was carrying big bags with a lot of clothes on his bike. Well, fast forward to summer vacation. I'm in the inner city meeting up with some friends at another coffee place than the one in the first encounter, and I see the same man. He seems to recognize me, and he starts walking towards the coffee place. He just stays some meters away from me, and then stares at me and my friends. I begin to tell my friends about this man, how scared I am of him, and they all start swearing at him and showing him the finger, but he just stays staring at me like a crazy person, as well as smiling with the most unnerving smile that I've ever seen. I don't know how to explain it, but I've just never been so scared of a human being in my life. He had a malicious smile that really made me freeze with anxiety. After a while, we all started ignoring him, as he wasn't leaving, and when it was time to go and separate from my friends, I just couldn't think properly. And I said I was going to take the bus with one of the friends I was with, so I wouldn't be alone in the bus stop with this creepy-ass man, because at this point, I was pretty sure he was going to follow me to the bus stop at least, if not, maybe even my home. We start walking to the bus stop, and of course he's following us. I began feeling 100 times more scared than before. For some context, he's with his bike at the same time he was when I first saw him. He's a bit ahead of us on his bike, stopping from minute to minute just to check if we're still going in that direction. My friend had also asked some of the boyfriends of hers which were at the coffee place to walk with us, and to walk with us to the bus stop to feel a little safer. In order to get to the bus stop and the bus, we had to get across this road. He remains on the other side of the road, and we then exhale, as we then realize he didn't take the bus with us. The man just starts waving, smiling with that same malicious smile while the bus is leaving. At this point, I then get off after a few stops, since the bus my friend was taking wasn't going in the direction of my house, and I just call my mom and dad to pick me up. My dad picks me up, and I tell him what happened, and he's livid. He tells me the next time I go out he's going to come with me and sit far away, and then just observe to see if the man shows his face again. Anyway, I don't go out for a while, being scared and all, and a few months pass, and I don't see him again. I had really started to forget all about him, until one late summer night. I was out with my ex and my cousin, and we wanted to go to a club. Since this was right after the pandemic, the clubs only held parties outside, and the party was on the street, and the DJ booth was placed basically on the windowsill of the street facade. We get some drinks from inside the club, and we go outside to dance, when I then see a bike and a man on it. I wasn't really sure if it was the same man or not, since it was dark outside, but I tell my ex and cousin, who were up to date with what was going on with this man. Thankfully for me, and really unluckily for the other people at the party, the police were called for public disturbance by the neighbors on that street, so they were there to shut down the party. As the man is circling around us on his bike and smiling, I then realize it's definitely him. I go straight to the police officer that was at the end of the street, and I tell him what's going on. When the man sees this, he instantly starts pedaling much faster, and I then lose sight of him while trying to pinpoint him to the police officer. The policeman just tells me that there's really not much that can be done, since the legal system is shit in our country, and that if I make a complaint about this guy, he'll most likely be let out with a warning, and that he'll only be in jail for one night, and then let free. He proceeds to explain how the only way to put him away for good is if he actually offends, which makes me angry as hell on the inside, and I also feel really disappointed again in the legal system of our country, but at least I got him off my back for that night. The last thing the officer tells me is to always be aware and be safe, and to never walk alone at night, since there had been a lot of reports of attacks in a park which was really close to the club we were at, as well as the center part of the city in general. That was the last time I saw him, but I still really remember it to this day, and I probably will never forget this man's face for as long as I live. I really feel rage towards him to this day, because he managed to make me feel so vulnerable and disarmed. I couldn't and will never understand why someone would want to cause so much psychological pressure to another person. It really is messed up.
I'm a 15-year-old male. I live in Germany, but I come from a small European country. This event had happened before I moved to Germany. In my country, we have field trips, usually at the end of 8th grade, that last for a week or so. Now, I've had my fair share of stalkers, but nothing like this. It was September in 2014, and I went to a field trip on an island with my class. I was 14 at the time. There was this girl, Jane. Jane used to be a normal girl up until that point. She was always kind of shy and really kept to herself, but everyone liked her. She was never bullied or anything, just a normal shy girl. We used to chat on Facebook a little bit, but nothing serious. I never really harbored any feelings towards her, neither in her favor nor against her. Now, back to the field trip. I've smoked a couple of cigarettes with my mates in our hotel room, and then we met outside. The teacher wanted to show us some plants that were specific for that area. Now, I've noticed that Jane was talking to me more often than before, and that she had walked very near to me, but I thought that that was merely a coincidence. I didn't make a fuss about it, but as time went by, things had started to get worse. She started touching me, hugging me, and following me, respectively. On the third day, we went on a cruise to a nearby island, and during the cruise, she was sitting next to me. She had a camera and was taking pictures of me. I had zero sense of restraint at that point since I was young and didn't think much of it. I've noticed that she was taking a suspicious amount of photos, mostly of me, and I told her to calm down. Then she talked to me for an hour, but she didn't say anything interesting. She was mimicking the Irish and British accents to me and basically blabbering stuff for approximately an hour. And I was just smiling and replying with, "That's nice." In the following days, she had started to hug me and make me feel uncomfortable, so one day I came to her and told her that we needed to talk in private. We went to the woods and I asked her if she was in love with me or something like that. She denied it and kept saying that there had been a misunderstanding, but I knew that there was something off about her. Then she told me her life story. She said that her mother is a schizophrenic and that she's severely depressed about it. I felt sorry for her, but still, her and that touching was incredibly inappropriate. During our conversation, my mates wondered where I am and organized a search party for me. They found us eventually, but she had decided to stay behind and let me go. I have no idea what she was doing after I left. On one occasion, I'm a little fuzzy about the details, she came into our hotel room asking for water, as if there wasn't any water in her own room. However, when she got the requested water, she refused to leave the room. We got rid of her by telling her that we were going out to have some fun. The next day, the harassing got even worse. She would follow me around and hug me. The peak of her abnormal behavior happened in the evening. I took a walk with a friend of mine and turned around briefly only to see her behind us. She was following us, I kid you not. I have never felt this kind of dread in my whole life. We have made our way down the shore and I hid behind a big rock next to a police station. "We should go inside and tell the police we have a stalker," my friend joked. Anyway, she couldn't find us and gave up finally. My best friend heard the story and went to her room to tell her to screw off. I was infuriated with him because it was rude of him, regardless of her actions. I'm usually not meek, but I thought that was horrible. Now I see that no matter how cruel that was, it was the right thing to do. I went to her room and apologized for my friend's actions. She was in her bed sobbing uncontrollably, and I calmed her down and went outside. A female friend of mine, Sarah, had invited me to come to her room so we could discuss something. I made my way to her room and saw 2 other girls there. We sat on the chairs in her balcony, and she had told me that Jane is a very depressed person who had done some self-harming in the past. I was shocked when I had heard that. So, amidst our conversation, I winced. I raised my look and saw Jane, maybe 50 meters or 160 feet away, just sitting on a rock, listening to music and staring at me. She had a solemn look in her eyes. I suddenly felt dismay and told my friends that we have a spectator. They winced too, and we decided to pry on her a little bit before backing out to the bedroom. "Just stay away from her," was the last thing Sarah told me before I left. To my luck, it was the end of our field trip and I finally got some rest. Weird encounters with her became fewer and fewer because she was often absent from school. Later I found out that she had overdosed on sleeping pills a couple of times but survived all of those occurrences. There was even a rumor that she had ended up in a psychiatric institution, but I have no proof of that and I can't tell you in confidence. The point of the story is that sometimes you have to be rude so you can prevent something like this from happening to you. It may seem cruel or it might even hurt the other person, but in the end, it's your life and you have to stand up for yourself and make sure that you're happy first.